Good afternoon, everyone. It's 3 o'clock, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us. My name is Jill Nogueras, and I'm the English coordinator at the Virginia Department of Education, and we are thrilled that you could join us for our Assessment Support Grade 6 Reading webinar this afternoon. This is a very friendly group. I'm loving all of the hellos and where you're from in the chat, so that's kind of fun. You can keep that up if you want. We love an outgoing group. I'm joined today by my colleagues in the Department of Learning and in collaboration with my colleagues in the Office of Student Assessment. So today with me on the line from the Department of Learning, I have Colleen Cassida, our middle school English specialist, and Carmen Carrick, our elementary English and reading specialist. And then from the Office of Student Assessment, I have Lauren Zelensky, who will be facilitating the assessment portion of this webinar, and then her colleagues, Catherine Ringley, Chris Tessera, and Melody Bushley, who will be answering questions in the chat, which leads me to my next slide. We are using the chat feature today to collect and answer any questions you may have. If you would please take the extra step when you go to send a chat in the drop-down menu. I think it defaults to all panelists, but if you switch it to all attendees or all panelists and attendees, then everyone who's participating today can also see your question. And I guarantee that you are not alone in your question. So it would be wonderful if you would share your question with the entire group so that we could respond to the entire group with the information. So just remember that we are using that chat feature. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start to be mindful of your time. I just kind of want to start out by giving a little bit of history here. As you all know, last March, the governor needed to do an emergency school closure and shut down the schools here in Virginia. So last spring, we were under an emergency shutdown, which kind of ended the majority of instruction for the school year. We still had school in whatever form that we could, but a lot of it was reviewing material that had already been covered. However, on June 9th, Governor Northam announced his phased reopening plan for Virginia schools. And to support that phased reopening, Dr. Lane, our superintendent of public instruction, shared a guidance documents to support school divisions as they figured out how to recover, redesign, and restart for 2020. So the biggest difference between last year and this year is that last year schools were closed. But now we are in a new school year and we have new instruction and school is happening. No matter where you are, there is some form of instruction happening. And at this point, it is all new instruction. So when we think about that recover, redesign, and restart document, one of the pieces that we want to make sure that we bring to your attention is this idea of providing our students with authentic learning experiences. And that's something that we're all working very hard to, and to be honest, are being incredibly innovative as you determine how to bring in authentic learning experiences to your students who are attending school in a variety of settings. So thinking about that authentic learning experience, we're really trying to prepare our students for the real world, to help them make informed career choices, bridge skill gaps, maybe some instruction that was missed last year that we need to fold into this year, really work on those critical thinking skills, their creativity, increase their engagement, which I know is really hard to do in a virtual environment, but how do we motivate students and boost their retention of information, and then also provide multiple perspectives. So we kind of were thinking about all of this in mind as we put together this assessment supports webinar series on how we could bring some of that in for you to use in your classrooms. So to give you some background on the material that you're going to see here today, it is all based on the 2017 English Standards of Learning. And this was based off of a couple of things. First being last year, the Office of Student Assessment and the Department of Learning worked together to interview elementary, middle, and high schools who were seeing growth in their standards of learning reading assessment performance. And we interviewed all these schools and asked them, what worked well? What best practices were you using? What recommendations do you have for your peers? And we presented a webinar, and it is still here. As you can see, it's linked in this presentation for you to see what kind of what the lessons learned were. So taking some of the best practices that were shared with us by those divisions, and then our current understanding of the standards of learning and standards of learning content and the progression of reading skills, put this together to support instruction of the 2017 standards of learning. So while we are going to be looking at question stems today, you should know that these are not necessarily assessment question stems. They're not meant to mimic SOL test questions. However, they're to provide educators with insight on how they might ask students meaningful questions that get at the heart of the skills presented in the 2017 English Standards of Learning. So when we're talking about some of these skills and you're trying to determine, well, how do I know if a student is understanding this? We're hoping that the question stems we provide you with today will get at some scaffolded approaches to kind of figure out where maybe in a formative assessment, you could determine student learning and where a student needs to go next. So just make sure that you're keeping the content of this presentation in perspective. This is not what we're using instead of instruction. This is to be used to support supplemental information to support the instruction of the 2017 English Standards of Learning. And your focus should remain on the standards as a whole, and the selection of authentic text should be used to support the introduction and review of skills. So another overarching theme that you're going to hear no matter what grade level you happen to pop in for is the idea of going into the 2017 English Standards of Learning curriculum framework. And this idea that our skills and our concepts spiral from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. And this is exceptionally important this year as we think about the fact that our students missed 10 weeks of instruction last year, yet all find themselves in the next grade level. So thinking about spiraling back to what was missed in that instructional opportunity and that gap there, and where we can scaffold it in and fold it into new instruction as we have been given the task of moving students forward. So keeping in mind, though, that in some ways we are quite fortunate that our students move through a progression of skills that spirals from kindergarten to 12th grade, because we're going to start on, looking at the setting in early elementary school, and we're still talking about setting with our seniors in high school. What changes is what we are doing with the setting, and what changes is the grade level of the text that students are analyzing. So we do have pieces that complicate the idea of setting, but we keep coming back to this idea of setting. I'm just using that as a quick example to show you why it's important that we keep spiraling back. And that hopefully will pick up a few students more each time. But as our spiral swings across the other way, hopefully we are able to push our students in another direction as well. So we are going to go through a 4-step process today to kind of show you how you might use this material to support the instruction of the 2017 English Standards of Learning. We're going to talk about this idea of authentic text and using grade level text. It is extremely important that when we are instructing our students, we are using grade level appropriate text. And then obviously also thinking about how, maybe our students who are not reading on grade level, they would have time in more of their independent work to be working on their instructional level. But as we are modeling and teaching our students that we are using grade level text, because at the end of the year, their assessment will also be on grade level text. So how can we use these rich texts to provide what our students need for instruction, but also to scaffold in some of that missed skills and content, and to push our students who are ready for a jump? We do have some kids whose instruction really did end 10 weeks early last year, and we have some students who went above and beyond and kept learning on their own. And so I would argue that the gap in our sitting in our classrooms this year is bigger than it has ever been before. and yet we are responsible for all of those students. So how can we use these rich grade level texts to support everyone who's sitting in our class? So we'll talk about that a little bit today. And then we're going to talk about the standards of learning and the information that can be found there and the progression of that standards and how to support students. And then we're going to look at the question starters. And these were designed to show a progression of skills to support the instruction of several standards. And I just want to quickly say that the ones that we have placed here today are specific to the text we are modeling with today. So if you were interested in finding question starters for other standards or other content topics, you might want to check out some of our other grade level presentations, because our questions were built on the text that we have. And so the text changes in every grade level. So the skills that are highlighted in each grade level also change. So just make sure that if you're interested in checking out some of the other pieces we have, you'll want to look in the other grade level presentations. And then step 4 is exploring instructional resources that are available that kind of tie into those skills. So it's like, where do I go from here? What can I do next with my students to reinforce and support this moving on? So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, who is going to walk you through selecting an authentic text.
Thank you so much, Jill, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. It has been an absolute pleasure to collaborate and to bring everyone this presentation. As Jill mentioned, we are going to be highlighting 2 different pieces of authentic text throughout this presentation. But our larger goal in this is that you will be able to take these 4 steps and continue to use them and apply them throughout the learning, the authentic learning that is happening within each one of your classrooms, however that may look this year and moving forward. So just like Jill brilliantly just set a purpose for today's presentation and for what to expect, within our classrooms, we set purposes for our students in terms of what they're going to learn that day or what they are going to focus on in that specific reading, whatever course it might be. But we also, as the educators and bringing the information to the students, need to set a purpose for ourselves as we are approaching the text that we are potentially presenting to our students. When we set this purpose, we need to approach the text kind of with one of 2 mindsets. I know my students are struggling with these skills, so does this text support those specific skills? Or I need to just see what skills are in this text, and then how can I apply it moving forward in my teaching? Either way, when you set that purpose, you are ensuring that the grade level appropriate text is truly meeting the skills and the needs that the students need to have reviewed, or if they support what needs to be introduced and continue to be scaffolded throughout their learning. Once you've determined that purpose, it is so important to read and highlight and really focus what and how that text is going to support the needs within your classroom. Always allow for extended teachable moments. While the text might truly support something like summary or text features, which are so important, there could be also opportunities to discuss main idea or to talk about things of that nature. And so remember to fold as many skills in as possible, but don't ever force a skill that the text doesn't have strong evidence for. Make sure that your text is there to always bring your children back to it, so then it is supporting comprehension, engagement, and always supporting your purpose that you have identified. So essentially, if you realize that the examples of that are found within that text, if they support that identified purpose, teach away. However, if you realize that these have great skills, but I don't need them right now, just use them later in your teaching practice, because every text has a purpose and you just have to set that purpose and determine it and use it to the best way possible so the skills are introduced, reviewed, and scaffolded as appropriate. We demonstrated this for you all in the text that we are providing within this PowerPoint through the use of annotations. We really wanted to pull out those specific skills that were essentially and most highlighted throughout what we considered to be and to support the authentic learning for your students. But we also wanted to provide you some guiding questions, and we wanted to provide you points of discussion to continue folding in those skills to ensure that we are really loving on each skill and not just putting a check in a checkbox and saying, got it, done, don't ever need to go back to this, because we always need to go back to our skills. So through the use of these annotations, as you can see here, this is just a screenshot of the first 2.5, 3 paragraphs of our first fiction piece we're going to talk about today. But please notice that even as you can see in that annotation, we have highlighted the skills of plot element, character development, and theme. However, throughout the annotations in the text, you will see points to talk about character development through maybe the conflict and the resolution and how that tells more about the character. So you can fold those skills back in with your students and continue to teach and reteach and just reteach one more time to really support student learning. Just a quick note too about the annotations. While you do see that VITA program heading there, we just wanted you guys to know that that is just a part of our IT program here, but these annotations have been specifically written by us for you to implement with these specific passages at your specific grade level. So we didn't want anyone to worry. They're not automated or they're there specifically for you in that passage. So as I have talked about, we did provide 2 different texts for you to apply these 4 different steps. And the first one, where we will walk you through a little bit, is called Uncle Mark's Family Recipe, and this is a fiction piece. We did provide a fiction and nonfiction text to ensure that students could be presented with opportunities in both genres. And as you see here, there will be that annotated Word document, which you just saw the screenshot of a moment ago, to help support all of the different skills that we have talked about and identified and talking points so that it can be implemented in your classroom. And again, while we did highlight plot elements, theme, and character development for this passage, those are just the skills that were truly able to be highlighted, but there are always ways to continue folding in other skills to support the 2017 standards of learning, which you will see within the annotations. And at this point, my friend Colleen is going to walk you through how to truly see that progression of the standards while you are implementing this authentic text.
Thank you, Lauren, and hello out there, everybody in middle school land. It's good to see you. I feel your energy. And like Lauren said, we're going to look at how we're going to examine the content and progression of the standards using our curriculum framework. So once you have selected your text and have determined what skills the text lends itself to, an important step in the planning process is looking at our curriculum framework to see exactly what the essential knowledge, skills, and processes in the framework you want to highlight, and be sure that students are going to have opportunities in the text to practice using that knowledge and those skills. Also, when looking at the framework, to really capture the progression and development of the skill you're focusing on in the text, be sure to review the grade level before and the grade level after in order to allow access for all our students. So this process is key to noticing the difference between the strands at each grade level. So for instance, In sixth grade, we're going to look at that middle bullet first. Students should be able to identify the elements of narrative structure, including character, plot, conflict, and theme. If you look in the essential knowledge and skills from the framework, that includes some really in-depth examination of text. So it would include identifying setting as time and place, explaining plot as the development of the central conflict and resolution. We're looking at sequence of events in a story, the writer's map for what happens and how it happens, to whom it happens. And then we're also looking at identifying characters as protagonists and antagonists. But in order for students to be able to be successful with those skills in sixth grade, we have to look back at fifth grade and see that students should be able to summarize plot events. And in the framework for fifth grade, under essential knowledge and skills, that requires them to have to summarize important plot events using specific details from the text. So this might be where some of your students still need your support, as Jill and Lauren have talked about. And knowing that those students are still working to summarize, they can be working with scaffolded questions to help build that base, but always allowing for progression into that sixth grade skill, because as we know, we are responsible for making sure that our students leave us with the best understanding of our grade level skills as possible. And so similarly, for our students who are already demonstrating understanding of our target skills for sixth grade, we can look at the next grade level progression to see where they will need to go in terms of narrative structure. And you see here, we go from identify to describe. And the last piece in that strand is a new level of analysis. So the opportunities where we can provide students with questions that get them thinking about the connections and influence each of these elements has on one another, we are setting students up for success in the following grade with that next level of skills. And then looking at SOL 6.5. So as we move up in grade levels and review the framework for the grades in which we fall between, right? Be sure to look at the other standards and skills that go with the standard you are focusing on in sixth grade. So you'll see here an example of like just that. In fifth grade, 5.5D is identify theme. It is its own standard so that students can practice with identifying the theme or themes of a text and noticing the thematic topic. So being able to identify theme in fifth grade builds the foundation for sixth grade when theme becomes one part of identifying elements of a narrative structure. And the essential skill for theme in sixth grade focuses on determining a theme or themes and explaining how it is developed through specific details. So we are using these other elements that have been taught more explicitly in fifth grade to help support the theme of the text. And the goal is to have students practicing how setting, character, plot, and conflict reveal the theme of a text. And that is a big jump from fifth grade. So we want to recognize if our students are struggling with making the connection between these elements, we want to go back to the fifth grade framework and develop opportunities for students who need to see these elements of narrative structure more explicitly in the grade level text you're working with. Again, you want students working through grade level text with supports so that they are being exposed to grade level vocabulary and texts that highlight those rich examples for the standards that you're working on. And this is important because when you look at seventh grade, 7.5B, students now have to start identifying, making connections, and then explaining what the theme is and how it has developed throughout the text. So the seventh grade essential knowledge and skills says that for students to be successful, they should be able to determine the themes or theme of a text and analyze its development over the course of that text. So knowing that we are headed to a more rigorous level of theme by seventh grade, you can build in that reflection using questions to think about that gets at those connections. So allowing students to write using support explaining theme and how they came to that conclusion. That's one way of building that spiral in and moving up and down the progression with your students. So you're basically planting the seeds for expansion on the standard. And this really could be done through vertical conversations and planning, where 6th grade reaches out to 5th grade teachers of, in your division of your feeder schools, and then working with your 7th and 8th grade peers to build that awareness of what students can do when they come to you, while they're with you, and then after they leave you. So it's a constant awareness of where we need to be in terms of that progression. And here's a final example of how to look back and to the next grade level to support that continuum of our students and standards. So in 6th grade, students should be able to explain how an author uses character development to drive conflict and resolution, that middle bullet there. But to be successful with that standard, the framework says that students should be expected to identify internal and external conflicts, including internal conflicts within characters, external conflicts between characters, and be able to describe how a fictional plot is often episodic and how those characters develop as the plot moves towards a resolution. So that's very complex in putting this all together, and thinking about 6th grade, how important it is that we're jumping from 5th grade to now middle school. We really want to make sure that in order for our students to be able to do these skills successfully with a grade level text, a good place to start is evaluating what they know based on the framework from 5th grade. So where 5.5C is describe character development, and the essential knowledge and skills requires students being able to describe how characters are developed by what they say, think, do, how other characters react to them in a story. And then they should be able in 5th grade to describe how some characters change and some characters stay the same. Those are all elements that we want to make sure that they've got before we get into the complexity of mixing this all together and putting it into analysis. So additionally, we can incorporate these other 5th grade skills about conflict and resolution and plot to determine where students are in terms of putting it all together. These skills can be used as guiding questions to figure out what background knowledge students are coming into at 6th grade, and then building from there to allow practice and target to get onto 6th grade skills. And so just like our other 2 examples, while planning and allowing for students to work through and hone in on their grade level understanding, and Lauren's going to talk about this, we're going to build in questions and activities that allow students who are ready to begin working with that 7th grade standard and skill set, where we are moving from just explaining to we look at how an author uses character development to drive conflict and resolution, and then describing those elements of narrative structure and how they influence each other. So step 2 is really intended for you to consider where your students are and where you want them to be with regard to the target SOL, and what other standards and skills will support that understanding. That word examine right there is exactly what you're doing here. You're really just pulling apart those pieces of the framework and looking back and forward to the next step so that you can support students at all levels in progressing with that standard using grade level texts.
And as
I'm gonna turn back to Lauren.
And as Colleen very, very eloquently described, in that our skills are definitely not meant to be taught or to be approached in isolation. And while in this PowerPoint and in this presentation, we are presenting them based upon that's a specific SOL, please know that was more of an organizational prompting to help to present and to help find information later. But we truly want skills taught and hope that skills can be taught together to ensure the greatest amount of application and comprehension for the students. So as we start these question starters and we kind of talk about them a little, please keep in mind that, again, these are not meant to be questions asked in isolation, and they truly are helping to support that idea of the progression of the standard that Colleen just walked us through. So for example, you can see here where we begin simply asking students to define plot elements. By determining what they know about plot elements will then help to determine the best next steps. Do we need to go back and reteach plot elements, or can we move forward applying them at the appropriate grade level with the grade level text to support that authentic learning? As you continue through these different question starters that we have given you for plot elements, you see that there's a lot of opportunity for personalization of those question starters for the text you're reading, for the skills you're applying, and for the students within your classrooms. While, for example, it might say, identify the plot element from the text you're reading, that question starter could be taken and applied to identify the cause and effect from the text you're reading, or identify the internal conflict from the text that you're reading. We intended with these question starters to allow them to have that opportunity to be tweaked the way you need them for your students in that moment with that text. And we continue to support through these different question starters that idea of what Colleen was just talking about, of knowing where they have been, where they are, and where they are going. And if you look at our next slide to support just plot elements, for example, you will see where we have also included opportunities to write about what has been read within that text. And by writing, we are truly able to ensure student application of the skill or skills that are being addressed, and to potentially move them beyond. So then students are able to be challenged and met at their appropriate level of need. And again, we have intended to leave those opportunities where you can insert the appropriate skill or the appropriate name, person, event, wherever it might be, so then it is truly personalized to what that student or those students need in that moment. We have continued this idea with the other specific skills that Colleen talked about with theme. Again, can you define what theme means? If you can, that's great. Let's meet them there and keep moving them forward. If they're struggling a little bit, then again, let's meet them there, fill in that gap, and then continue to move them forward. There are multiple opportunities here as well to present students with a question starter that's turned into a multiple choice kind of item, or that is left more open-ended for students to respond, giving that explanation and giving that textual support to ensure that there is the understanding necessary so the skill can continue to be applied across different texts. And again, we gave you a writing example. And then with this last skill that was specific to this text, we again tried to begin with a question to determine where students are and where they need to go, and then to give more question starters specific to the needs presented and to the skill. As Jill did mention earlier as well, there are other question starters for other grade levels dependent upon the skill. And so while we are looking at the 6th grade question starters today, if there is an example, let's say in 4th grade, of another skill that you're searching for, jump into that presentation and use that question starter for the appropriate grade level rigor and skill support that you need. So please know that there are lots of question starters out there to help support whatever it is that your determined purpose of your text needed to be for your students, and to support that authentic learning and the authentic grade level text that your students are requiring. And just like the other questions, we did again provide opportunities for multiple choice, for open-ended, and for writing about what was read. So we wanted to ensure that these question starters were supporting exactly what Colleen had just talked to us about with the progression of our skills. And because we do want to be able to set you up for success to use this beyond just these two passages that you're being presented with today, Colleen is now going to talk about additional instructional resources to really help take things to the next step for you all.
Thanks, Lauren. Yes. So this step 4 is about exploring instructional resources that will support your work on the skills and standards of focus, like Lauren was just talking about. So once you've found your text, like we've said, and you've checked, with your division resources, and you have ensured alignment to the goal of your lesson, we really encourage you to look through our abundance of comprehensive instructional plans. This link is on our site, and it's also here on this page of the presentation for you to be able to access after today. We're going to walk you through the page layout and highlight some lessons that might be useful to teaching the standards that we're talking about today. So this is a snapshot of the main page. And if you ever are in a pinch and you can't remember how to get to the link or what it was called, you can always type on the VDOE website, go into the search bar and type comprehensive literacy plans or instructional plans in English, and the search bar will take you to that page that way as well. These lessons were developed by Virginia teachers, and they are here for your use, whether you'd like to use them, use a different text, but keep some of the lessons. You could do that, or if you need some inspiration for additional or supplemental support, they're again there to be used for however you need them. And if we go to the next slide, there we go. So the lessons are categorized by strand and then by grade band. And I want to point out that while these lessons are kind of designated for a particular set of grades, just like the question stems that Lauren walked you through, that doesn't mean that they can't be modified or adapted to fit the needs of a different grade level or a set of students. So again, there are plenty of lessons that might not fall under the grade you teach. So you want to make sure you explore the plans through the skills that they cover, which is why they are titled and labeled based on the skills that they're covering. And so once you click on a lesson, the format looks like this, and you see that the primary or focus standard is listed first. But because these lessons reflect best practice of integrating all the strands, the integrated strands are listed below the primary. So you'll then see that the essential understanding is there along with the essential knowledge and skills, which is coming from that framework. And these sections will help guide you in figuring out what students will need to know in order to complete the learning in the lesson, as well as the skills that students will need to demonstrate in order to show success with the strand and standard through the activities in the lesson. Next, you'll notice that the primary SOL is listed because this really is the target standard for that lesson. But again, just like in the overall strand, the reinforced related standards are also listed. So that, again, you can see where there are opportunities in the lesson for reading and writing together, as we've talked about throughout, and other standards by grade level that will support and connect your understanding. So we'll look at some lessons that would support the standards we're looking at today. And the first lesson is on plot elements. And you can find, you can see that the focus is SOL 6.5A. And I just want to reiterate that any of the resources on our site could fit within a unit or be used as a support for students below, above, or on grade level. So you will see our guided notes here to reinforce the idea that if you are reading through the text within this lesson and you see that it supports opportunity for spiraling of additional skills, by all means, include those opportunities because we truly want our students to improve and grow in their reading comprehension and applying the skills. So this plot elements lesson focuses on development of plot and conflict, and it uses various strategies for identifying the progression of plot. The focus is on how the author uses conflict to drive the events of the plot. So it's getting at that component of the standard that focuses on how the author develops plot through narrative elements. And the lesson includes scaffolded graphic organizers and anchor charts that, again, you can use or not, depending on how you want to access and use this lesson in your classroom with your students. There is a writing component to go with the lesson, as well as extensions and connections. There's always a section there in these lesson plans for all students at various reading levels and ability level. So while the target SOL and grade level is 6th grade, there are several resources you could pull for a 7th or 8th grade lesson, or go back down the spiral to lower grade levels to use there. So using what you need to support your students is the key here. And so that is something that I really encourage you to check out. And then our next lesson that we have there is on theme analysis. And if you notice, we've kind of paired these skills and standards that go together because they kind of overlap when we're teaching them, and they come out of a text nicely together. So this would support learning for SOL 6.5, as you can see, but again, could be used for multiple purposes at different levels. And what could be useful in this lesson is that it uses the same text from the previous lesson on plot and conflict. So you could get an idea of how to continue building skills and tying these standards together naturally and authentically using one text. In this resource, the teacher compares the event of a text to the top of like an iceberg. And it's very thorough and having the students think about what you see on the surface and the bottom of an iceberg, and how it could represent the theme and what we can interpret and analyze that we don't always see at first glance of a text. And that's just one example of how to get students thinking about what we do with text. So there are several accessible texts referenced here and in some of our other lessons from Common Lit, which is a free website that offers a variety of fiction and nonfiction and poetry. So they are available to you. And the teacher directions include guided questions for students to discuss in whole group, and same for independent reflection or small group. And some are used for written responses as well. So that is something that you could connect with the previous text. So I encourage you to check that one out. And I believe we have one more in this section. Well, there are two more, but it's on this slide. So these last two resources, again, cover like plot and characterization, as you see. And the first lesson on indirect and direct characterization provides really thorough characterization charts and a model example of how students can use that support to support the text in the lesson, or it could be used with a different text, as we've talked about. There's also opportunity for partner work, and the lesson definitely lends itself to modifications based on whether your division is in all virtual settings for now, or if you have a blended model. You could definitely modify some of this work to share on Google Docs, or what would be best for your students to be able to collaborate still in whatever environment you're working with. But the lesson strategies are gearing up for students to demonstrate their understanding through a written reflection on how an author uses words to reveal character traits. And like all of our lessons, there are activities that provide extensions and connections for all levels of students. So similarly, the second resource, characterization and plot, note that while that one is labeled a 7th grade resource, that does not mean it cannot be used in another grade level. So what this lesson provides in terms of scaffolds and explicit instruction with plot, characterization, setting, and conflict, it would benefit students who need a little more support, but also students who are ready to be challenged with that next level in the progression. And it looks at how setting influences characters and plot development using questions and graphic organizers that break down thinking to allow for processing before putting it all together in a written response. So, and I know it's hard to capture all that by just describing it. So I just wanted to give you kind of a taste and an overview of what you could expect to see in that, but don't limit yourself to something that just says 6th grade. This is an opportunity for you to explore all of those extended applications. And I think I'm going to turn it back over to Lauren, where we can get into some of this authentic text and what it looks like in the process.
Absolutely. Thank you. We have just taken you through those 4 steps for a fiction text. And so we also wanted to provide an opportunity to see this modeled through a nonfiction piece as well. And just like with the fiction piece, we did set our purpose and we determined that this text best supported 3 different skills. And those skills were main idea, summary and details, and inference. And again, as we have talked about several times throughout this presentation, while those were the 3 skills of available to highlight at a very high level, where there were opportunities to scaffold in and go back to teaching ideas about text features or things of that nature, that is absolutely encouraged, and it is modeled through the annotations for this text, where you will see where we provide thoughts and ideas to facilitate conversation and discussion with your students, focused on these 3 skills here, but also spiraling in and reviewing other skills associated with our 6th graders for the 2017 standards. And so, as we have done before, we're going to walk you through step 2, 3, and 4 again, just so then you can see how this can be applied across different kinds of texts. And Colleen is now going to walk us through the progression of those 3 identified skills within this grade level authentic text that we are providing for you.
Okay, so we're back to step 2, right? And if we notice on the blueprint at each grade level, it says the same thing: identify main idea, identify main idea, identify main idea. But that's where the blueprint stops us. And so only using that to figure out what skills to teach under main idea by grade level isn't going to give you the in-depth knowledge and skill that we want to get at in our questioning and in our lessons. For instance, in 5th grade, to be successful with main idea, the student will have to determine the main idea of a text and then summarize supporting key details, right? So in grade 6, the framework requires that students use strategies and rules for summarizing, such as find or create a main idea statement. So we're getting at a little bit more in-depth level of identifying main idea. So then, in order for our students to get at what we're trying to teach them in 6th grade, but then preparing them for that next level in 7th grade, to be successful in identifying main idea, students should be able to determine that main idea and central ideas in a text and analyze that development over the course of the text. So as you see there, the progression of identifying main idea, it becomes more complex in terms of what skills students are working with at each grade level. And the framework is there to help you determine what exactly you want students to be able to do with that standard at each grade level. So that's really important to keep that framework handy and ready to have those discussions about what you are actually getting the students to do. And so if we look at 6.6C, that's summarizing supporting details. And we see that that's the exact same wording on the blueprint as it is in 5th grade, but it changes in 7th grade. So we have to think about like how we're going to get them eventually to that identifying the supporting details piece to the standard in 7th grade. So if we look at that progression, 5th grade, in 5th grade, they need to be able to use those key details to summarize. And as we talked about earlier, looking at that framework to determine which skills can support other standards. So main idea and summary are starting to kind of go together as we notice and progress in the frameworks. And so, because in order to do one, you have to be able to do the other. And that's really all about that spiraling. So then in 6th grade, if we look at the skills that we want our students to be successful with and prepared to move to the next grade, it isn't just, they're not summarizing just to create a main idea statement, but they need to be able to use strategies and rules for summarizing, such as deleting trivia and redundancy, and being able to substitute a general term for a list. So that gets a little more specific, but still depends on that foundation of the grades before. And then in 7th grade, we now have added, as we talked about, onto that standard for summarization, summarize with identifying supporting details, because the framework, the essential skills and knowledge, the framework for 7th grade is already preparing students to use those skills that will require summarizing. And that's getting more in depth toward determining the central idea of a text and how it is developed over the course of a text. So students can't reach this skill required in 7th grade and beyond if we do not address what is needed in those 5th and 6th grade with regard to summarizing and even main idea. And in this progression example, looking at what students will need to do with making inference and drawing conclusions, you see that in 5th grade, students have to work in a text to locate that information that supports what they think about a text. But then in 6th grade, when they get to us, we are introducing students to these terms of explicit and implied information, and have to provide opportunities for them to use this vocabulary when drawing conclusions and making inferences. And that's because when they progress to the next grade level, we notice a change where we're holding students accountable for making logical conclusions based on the text. And that word changes the rigor and expectations for students. And so as 6th grade teachers, we have to be mindful that students are making purposeful inferences and connecting to the text with what they are finding. All right, Lauren, you're up.
Why, thank you, ma'am. Again, as we did with our fiction text, we have provided different question starters here that do indeed support the specific skills that did help determine and support our purpose for that authentic text. But again, you can see, as Colleen has walked us through those different progressions, that these questions are going to do that too. What is a main idea? And again, being able to determine what they know based on the progression of where they were, where they are, and where they are going. And again, having that opportunity to personalize these different question starters for the text that you are reading with your students, and the ability to interchange different skills based on your need. I mean, looking at bullet number 3, that's a great opportunity to, talk about maybe the author's purpose or which statement expresses a fact or an opinion, and have students explain based on textual evidence why their answers are their answers, and supporting all of that. Again, these different question starters support multiple choice questions, open-ended questions, and writing. You will see for this bullet specifically, identify an alternate title for, and then whatever text you're reading. And again, prompting your students to use specific details from the text to support their answer. So if students are able to provide that alternate title, they have truly understood the main idea of that text that they have read. And again, you see the same idea for the different skills that have been highlighted for this nonfiction passage. What is a supporting detail? Again, identifying what they know so you can continue to move forward with them. And again, inserting the correct information, location, genre, titles, whatever it may be, to ensure that those question starters are facilitating conversation and facilitating the different skills that you're introducing or reviewing and scaffolding, and getting the students to the rigor that they need to understand those different skills. Again, ending with a writing example for you. And we did this one last time for you for our final skill for this passage. Though again, please keep in mind, anytime you can layer in other skills, always take that opportunity. We always want to embrace those teachable moments that are presented to us through discussion and what the text does truly support. And so there are several different examples there to just really highlight and focus on the skill progression for these different question starters. And now Colleen has you one more time to talk about taking these skills beyond just this text we presented and how to apply it within your classrooms.
Okay, Lauren, thank you. And all right, being mindful of our time. So I'm just going to direct you to some of the lessons in our instructional plans that that you guys could check out and see how it is an extension or a support material for these specific skills that we've been talking about. So this using details to determine main idea, it focuses on 6.6b, but it is housed in the nonfiction section in our list of resources in the grade level band for 3 through 5, because it is such a strong support for those lower 3rd and 4th and 5th grade students. So please do not discount that it's in there. It provides a variety of strategies that would work all the way up through 6th and 7th grade. And it focuses on how authors write nonfiction and that they have a purpose. And then we have another one there, which is housed in our, this resource is in our nonfiction grade band for 6 through 8, and it focuses on the primary standards there of 6.6C and D. There are some really useful activities there as well, so encourage you to check that out to support for summary. And then the last one that we have provided for you is nonfiction inferencing, and that is also in the 6 through 8 grade band, but while it's assigned as a 7th, 8th grade lesson, the resources and text are relatable and they're on grade level for a 6th grade lesson as well. So please check that out. And you know, if you have anything that you want to replace with something, again, these can be used for the purposes that you need them to be. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Jill to close us out.
Thank you, ladies. We are really excited that you have stuck with us this afternoon, and just want to go over a few really important resources before we close it out. We realize also that you are working with a couple of different offices here who maintain different web pages within our website, and that it can be a little tricky trying to find different things on different sites. So we've put everything that is pertinent and important to this presentation here attached at the end of this PowerPoint, which will be posted with the recorded webinar, this PowerPoint, and the sample annotations that Lauren referenced today will all be posted on that assessment supports webinar page, which I believe Carmen has put in the chat a couple of times. But anyway, if you were to click on the first link here, you would end up at our English page, which goes through our standards of learning, curriculum framework, crosswalks, progression charts, kind of all that vital fundamental information. And then what you see here linked are the different blueprints for each of the assessed courses. I just want to remind you again, I think that both ladies did a tremendous job demonstrating today that sometimes we need to go beyond the blueprint. The blueprint is just going to give us that top level standard of learning, but that curriculum framework really gets into what that looks like as we're developing skills with our students to support them. So that could definitely support us as we figure out how to instruct our students to be ready for those top line standards of learning that are found on the blueprint. We also have the reading progression charts that listed there so that you can kind of see that progression of skills. Colleen did a great job going through 5th, 6th, and 7th, kind of to show you how things change. But that reading progression chart would be really helpful as well. If you are using the blue ones, please throw those out. We don't use those anymore. Those are aligned to 2010. We are looking at the orange colored progression charts. We also have the curriculum framework and the standards here. And in addition to that, we have information about assessment. So we have a link here to computer adaptive testing, because as you are aware by now, middle school reading assessments are computer adaptive. So there is a link there so that you can get information about what it means to be a computer adaptive test and how that works for students. There's a comparison document between a passage-based computer adaptive test and a traditional test so that you can better understand the differences there and what it means to be a passage-based computer adaptive test. And then there's a link here to this assessment supports literacy webinar series that we're in right now. I highly encourage you to go back to the one we provided, like a K-12 overview on October 1st. All of the materials for that are posted there, and I really encourage you to check that one out, specifically because it identifies which standards we cover in each of the grade level presentations. So if there's something, a skill that we really get at because the text supported it for the 8th grade presentation, well, then you will get the 8th grade, question starters for that skill in the 8th grade presentation. So you'll want to go and look at that so that you can see comprehensively all of the skills that are addressed through this series. Also wanted to point out that in the 5th grade presentation and in the 8th grade presentation, we have paired passage demonstrations. So if you're interested in getting more information about that, those skills and question stems are found in the 5th and 8th grade presentations. And then the Recover, Redesign, Restart document that I talked about at the beginning is there. An FAQ about passage-based CAT testing, the SOL practice items that are available in TestNav 8. TestNav 8 is the program that your students download to their computers and actually take the assessment from. And those practice items have been updated to align with the 2017 English Standards of Learning. Some of the items are still aligned from last time. So you may see some repeat items, and that's okay, because we're just giving students practice with the material and really practice in TestNav. So looking at how to use the tools, how to cross things out, how does the TEI function, and to get the kids really comfortable with TestNav 8 so that that is not a complicating factor on the day of the assessment. So those practice items are there for you. And since we have been under the 2017 Standards of Learning for several years now, we do have a couple of years of SOL Institutes and Deeper Learning Conferences that are all about instruction of the 2017 standards. So you can see presentations from your colleagues from all around the state about how to best support students in the instruction of the 2017 Standards of Learning, located on those 2 links. A link again to the instructional plans, which I believe we have roughly 130 posted. So if you have not dug into those, and if today didn't pique your interest, I really hope that you spend some time there, because again, you don't need to use the texts that are linked there. You can use whatever text works for your community. Those are just samples, and you don't have to do something from beginning to end. You can take bits and pieces if there's a strategy that you think would support learning for your students. And want to wrap it out here with Superintendent's Memo 249-20, which is the memo that came out this fall that once again references that the spring 2021 Standards of Learning reading assessments for grades 3 through 8 and end of course will be on the 2017 Standards of Learning. So up until this year, we were still being assessed under 2010, and we would have been assessed on the 2017 Standards of Learning last spring if school had not shut down. But school is no longer shut down, and we are active and we are learning, and we anticipate that all assessments will be on this year and that they will be in the spring based on the 2017 standards of learning. So we really hope that you found this information helpful in your endeavor to support students in their learning of those standards. I leave you here with our contact information and how to reach all of us. We are happy to support. We want you to do well. We want your students to do well. And we want everyone to feel really good about their learning and a love of reading in English at the end of the day. So please feel free to reach out to us. Like I said, all of this material will be posted on our Assessment Literacy Webinar Series webpage. And you are welcome to join us for 7th grade, 8th grade, or end of course. But if you are unable to do so, since you know the structure of this presentation, you can easily go into any of those presentations and find the materials you want. So thank you so much for a wonderful afternoon, and we hope you have a great night. Thank you.